For years, the Conservatives have touted the F-35 fighter jet as the best replacement for our CF-18s. Then Defense Minister Peter MacKay even gave them the Top Gun approval. But the procurement program is struggling to take off. An F-35 engine caught fire on the runway of a Florida air base last week, with one source saying the engine ripped through the top of the plane.
I should give pause to the government.
Opposition parties hope this apparent setback will push the government to look at other planes as an option, saying the whole process is set up to favor the F-35.
That the Canadian public is not going to be very happy if they go ahead and do another sole source of this aircraft without having a full competition.
The government has stood behind the F-35 since 2006, calling it the only fighter jet Canada needs. And Defense Minister Rob Nicholson didn't comment on the problems or delays with the planes. Now, the plane isn't the only problem, it's the process. In 2011, Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page pegged the cost at $30 billion over 30 years, not the $14.7 billion as National Defence had claimed. A year later, the Auditor General identified problems with the procurement process, saying the jets will cost $25 billion. Former Assistant Deputy Minister for National Defence Alan Williams believes the government is still going to pick the F-35, but he wouldn't recommend it.
To select it now, while it's still being developed and you don't know what it can or cannot do and you don't know the price, that makes no sense.
Others contend the CF-18s are getting too old and the military can't wait any longer to replace them. Either way, because of this latest issue with the F-35, the future of Canada's next-generation fighter jet is still up in the air.
Hi there, I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
You're tuned in to Video Radio, where we're taking a look at the Harper Conservatives, or just the Conservatives.
Yes, let's not forget we have an election coming up in 2015.
And I'm thinking of running for this election based on the F-35 issues. Them blowing up on the tarmac, probably not a good idea. They haven't had a functional plane out of that thing yet.
And of course, they still have their heads up their butts about it. They still want to keep investing our money, your money, into the F-35.
So last report was they had $500 million invested in the F-35. We're going to look up this, and let's jump into the prison industrial complex.
A joint CBC News Canadian Press investigation has learned that 2 out of every 3 women in federal prisons use powerful mood-altering drugs, including quetiapine. That number up dramatically over a decade when a 42% rate was considered problematic by Correctional Service Canada, which now won't talk about the new statistics or the way it prescribes drugs in prisons. Dr. David Jerling says the toxic side effects of drugs like quetiapine are well known.
The drug can kill people if used inappropriately, and especially when you use it in large numbers of people. It's inevitable that someone's going to be harmed and someone's going to be killed from the indiscriminate use of drugs like this.
Indeed, this memo we obtained reveals until 2011 at least federal prisons were using quetiapine for unapproved treatment. The memo lays out new criteria for the drug. Used to treat the illness it was licensed for is the directive, nothing more. CSC will not say what was behind that directive, writing only it was part of a regular review. In the U.S., the same drug has been banned from prisons in several states. The head of an advocacy group for women in prison says the warnings about over-medication have been growing for years. The federal correctional investigator has launched a probe into how prescription drugs are used and monitored in prisons.
We want to make sure that prescription drugs are being used appropriately. We want to make sure that the legal requirement that the Correctional Service of Canada has to provide health care to an acceptable professional standard is in fact being done, and we can't do that unless we get the information.
The Elizabeth Fry Society also wants the Auditor General to investigate, to lay out the long-term effects on the female prisoners and the cost to society, where the women will eventually return, as well as to find out why federal officials couldn't immediately account for precisely what was happening with these drugs. Susan Bonner, CBC News, Toronto.
So the prison industrial complex not working out.
Well, you know, you got to keep them women quiet. You know, that's where you keep on them psychotropic drugs.
And of course, we get to pay for this all with our taxpayer dollars. Of course, We know for a fact incarcerating people does not work, but they maintain the system anyways because there's so much money involved.
Well, a drug slave is a happy slave.
Yes, and talking about a drug slave, Mike Duffy was back in the news again.
There may be a bit of fallout for the Senate scandal. I hope you haven't forgotten about it.
We haven't.
For the past few months, it seemed like Canadians and the government took a Senate scandal sleeping pill, but they were jolted awake today.
Can you tell us?
The opposition was quick to pounce after learning of the criminal charges suspended Conservative Senator Mike Duffy now faces.
This was a senator that was handpicked by Stephen Harper, by our Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister's office is not defending Duffy, far from it, saying in a statement the conduct described in the numerous charges against Mr. Duffy is disgraceful. The Conservatives have done all they can to separate themselves from Duffy and the Senate scandal. At the height of it, last October, the Prime Minister traveled to Europe to announce a deal with the EU that wasn't signed, hoping to get Canadians to talk about something other than expense-fiddling senators. Stephen Harper has always insisted he had no knowledge of Duffy's misdeeds or of the $90,000 check his former Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright, wrote Duffy. But Duffy has argued the Prime Minister was well aware, showing a willingness to attack the man who appointed him to the Senate. Dan Legere wrote a book on Duffy and says the suspended senator told him he'd target Conservatives in court.
One of the first things he said to me was that if I'm going to be charged and this is going to go to court, I welcome that and I'm going to bring up every last shred of evidence I have.
It's been suggested Duffy's lawyer could even call the Prime Minister to testify. Lawyers we spoke with say it's legally possible, but only if it can be proven Harper has material information relevant to the case. This political analyst says with an election next year, Duffy's court case will be catastrophic for the Conservatives.
A story that unravels very slowly with a small number of details released every day, and so it's going to be in the news night after night to the detriment of the government.
And a scandal the Conservatives have tried hard to avoid may now be unavoidable.
So, just to make sure that you recapture that one, yes, Stephen Harper, during the election in 2015, could be summoned to testify.
But he'll probably choose not to, thus displaying his usual contempt of our judicial processes.
Yes, just remember, he is constantly doing things like proroguing Parliament, ignoring major financial issues, and making sure that he spews out the propaganda. Of course, we're here to talk about it.
Including Zionist propaganda. Because we've got Israel's back, according to our dear leader.
Indeed, Israel is the only country in the Middle East which has long anchored itself in the ideals of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Canada supports Israel fundamentally because it is right to do so.
As the death toll climbs in Gaza, so does the anger worldwide. In Calgary, fights erupted Friday between Israelis and Palestinians.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
And hundreds lining the street near the Israeli consulate in Toronto. Everyone here wants the same thing, for the fighting and the killing to end.
What has Israel done? It is exercising its fundamental right to defend itself and its people.
Medics say the overall Palestinian death toll has now soared to at least 410. The figure jumped high following a massive Israeli assault on the Shajaiya district in eastern Gaza early on Sunday. Israeli tanks and artillery continue to shell northern and eastern Gaza, while fighter jets keep pounding other positions in the densely populated region.
Well, we would like to thank again everybody here in Canada for the support we are getting at the embassy and here in our consulate. A lot of messages, emails, phone calls, and your politicians have been wonderful. The Prime Minister has been wonderful. So I cannot ask for more.
Protesters are urging Prime Minister Harper to stop the assault, and people here vow to continue protesting until the Israeli offensive stops.
And therefore, through fire and water, Canada will stand with you.
So we have three specials right now talking about the genocide happening in Palestine, and most of Canada is really fed up. We had a major article in the Capital News in Kelowna that talked about the fact that Harper just keeps spieling off the same nonsense, but the world is listening now.
But it's not just Harper, it's all our major political parties are all keeping silent on the slaughter of innocents in Gaza.
We're going to be covering that story in depth coming up, and you know we're going to give you the true story. We're also giving you the true story about the propaganda from the Conservative governments regarding the tar sands.
Apparently a new study's come out regarding that the tar sands maybe could be toxic.
Check this out.
For generations, First Nations people have lived off the land around Lake Athabasca, but it's a way of life they now say has been destroyed. Chief Steve Coudray says oil sands development upstream from Fort Chipewyan is poisoning the land and poisoning his people.
I'd be paddling in a river somewhere and I'd be able to dip my cup in the water and drink without any hesitation. Today, I wouldn't dare. And I wouldn't even wish that on my worst enemy.
It's a concern that is backed up by a new study.
A situation that it's alarming. It's also a situation that demands attention.
University of Manitoba researcher Stefan McLaughlin says cancer rates in Fort Chipewyan are higher among those who work in the oil sands or eat traditional foods and local fish, which have high concentrations of heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury. Those who avoid eating traditional foods have turned to less healthy options. McLaughlin says it's a perfect storm.
People are eating those foods, which appears to make them, in some cases, sick, or they're switching over to store-bought foods, which also makes them sick.
And as the leader of my First Nation, I will not play with people's lives. I will protect my people.
Tom Vernon, Global News.
The report calls for tougher regulations against emissions from oil sands development and better monitoring of the contamination. McLaughlin says he will continue to gather data in the region.
So you know they're not talking about the major cancer studies that are happening around there, but the Indian chiefs are.
The people of Fort Chippewa are very aware.
So make sure that you get informed about the unethical oil that's coming out of the tar sands, and that the way that even the Americans, and above all the Germans, don't want to touch this stuff.
Hey, but it's part of our economy, don't forget.
Yes, the economy. So, as we substitute the words bank profits for the words economy anytime the Conservatives speak, we look forward to another quick 15 minutes talking about Harper and his attitude on Mr. Putin.
And other Tory troubles.
All coming up. Stay tuned.
The Economic Action Plan is working for everyone. Women. These guys have different colored skin, but they still play for the same team. This child is Asian.
Actually, women working full-time still earn an average of 20% less than men working full-time. Racialized women are 48% more likely to be unemployed than non-racialized men. Half of all First Nations children live in poverty. Help us come up with a better plan. Visit economicactionplan.ca.
Dirty rings. I can't get the stains off the countertop.
Hey, relax. Try the Polyevra Smug Wipes.
Smug Wipes? What do?
They're the slick lemony towelette that cleans up any messy spill.
My, those do look annoyingly fresh.
Just take one out and mash that little snout into the stain until...
It's gone. Look at that. It cleans up anything like the obedient little wipe it is. I can just grind that cocky little smirk into the stain until the stain and the smirk disappear.
They even smell arrogant.
Yeah, way too lemony. I've never seen a more sycophantic wipe.
But they get the job done.
Look at this. There's nowhere a Polyevra Smug Wipe won't go.
And the best thing, they're an easy flush.
Smug Wipes.
I like them.
Polyev Smug Wipes. Good enough for the PM's messes, good enough for yours.
Oil and slave labor. These two wonderful industries make modern life a breeze. And what this fine little filly doesn't realize is that her chic accessories and stunning appearance come from oil and slave labor.
Huh?
That's right, classy lassie. Everything from your thong to your nail polish, your smartphone to your eyelashes come from oil and slave labor. Your top from Uzbekistan. Shorts from China. Jewelry from Indonesia. And your iPhone from Taiwan.
Oh no, not my iPhone!
Steve Jobs may have been a genius, but he couldn't work like a 5-year-old Asian boy can. Even your brawn panties from Bangladesh. Whoa there! Looks like science can go no further. Except for these silicone beauties from DuPont.
Hey.
Oil and slave labor, making the Western world beautiful.